My name is Ahmad Alhour, and I've been a team lead at TrustU for 4 years. TrustU is a German-based company where we specialize in machine learning and user reviews analysis. What I would like to talk to you about today is the result of lessons I've learned, mistakes I made, experiences I had at TrustU leading several teams, as well as everything I learned from conversations with numerous people, as many as I could have, pretty much on the topics, since I'm really passionate about making teams better. Coming from an individual contributor role, I had bad team leads, excellent team leads, great team leads, and all of these experiences brought me to where I am today. And before we actually begin, I'd like to give you a teaser, some sort of like a trailer for what the tech talk will be, so that you don't escape the tech talk and actually wait until the end. So hopefully, by the end of this tech talk, I'll inspire you, or I'll teach you how to inspire action better than Yoda himself, but in less broken English. How to lead people in severely drastic situations better than Jon Snow. And what kind of mistakes you would be making, and hopefully how to avoid them. Having said that, let's start actually talking about what leadership is. So leadership is all about influence. And John Maxwell is one of the world's most renowned researcher on leadership. Him, alongside his company Equip, has trained hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people to be better executives, managers, and leaders in different industries and companies. And the way he thinks about leadership is very suitable to how we think about leadership as engineers. We can think of leadership ability as if it's like a roof. Like the lower your ability to lead, the lower the roof on your effectiveness. The higher your ability to lead, the higher the roof is on your ability, on your effectiveness. We can then translate it into an easy to remember formulas of like 3 variables. If you increase your ability to lead, you increase your ability to influence, which leads to increasing your impact. So you can think of this as a team member, as an individual contributor who wants to be a team lead, or a team lead who wants to multiply the impact of your team. How can I increase the impact within my team, or my company, or a community of practice, or an open source project? And you can walk backwards to it, like how can I increase my influence? How can I increase my ability to lead? But how can we really measure impact, like engineering impact? How do we track our progress as we increase our engineering impact? Well, the good news is we can relate to some established maps. We can think of this, the 5 levels of leadership map, as just a map to help us keep track of where we're going with regards to, are we really increasing our impact, or are we just stuck in space-time? You can think of the lowest level of leadership not as the bad or the most unethical, but the least impactful. And the highest level of leadership not as the ethical or moral or good, but as the most impactful. So the lowest level of leadership, which is leadership by position. This is the classical example of the newly promoted tech lead who is excited about software architecture, CI/CD pipelines, refactoring everything out of life, staying on top of their game, where they make all the decisions and people pretty much follow them because they have to, right? Whom of you had a tech lead at some point in your career that was like that? Just a little bit. I'm not saying your current tech leads are like that, just like in the past. A few people. And soon enough, you'll realize how that is not really impactful, right? Because it demoralizes the team. People say, like, what the hell am I doing here? Like, this guy or this girl is making all the decisions all by themselves, and that's when people start leaving. A more impactful way to do it is to start building interpersonal relationships with your team, right? Which is not, it's not like charisma, like as touchy-feely charisma, but as in giving people their space, acknowledging how they want to grow or where they want to be. And obviously that comes with its own cons, because it's all fun and dandy until you really have to arrive at results. And you can have all the interpersonal relationships you have or you want in your team. If you're not arriving at results, you're not really impactful. And that's level 3. That's when the team lead or tech lead builds credibility and reliability. People can come to you with really exciting new projects, like we're building whatever SaaS product or building a product weekly newsletter for whatever project that you have, without worrying that it will not be actually built. And then you kind of can see where that has the limitation. simply because your team members are not going to be stuck where they are. They're going to grow eventually. And if you're not leading people by growing them, like level 4 leader, you're not really having the highest impact that you can have. And that's where level 4 actually comes in. But the highest level of leadership in terms of impact is when you actually lead people through mission. It's when you inspire action, growth, direction through the ownership of a mission, through the ownership of why you're doing what you're doing. Like, why are we really working on this SaaS project? Are we just writing code for the sake of writing code? Or adopting whatever technology for the sake of adopting it? So what would be even more inspiring than that? And this, like, we can start coming up with preliminary conclusions about leadership. If we're going to have some sort of a leadership formula or a leadership recipe, we have to tackle 3 things in a little bit more detail. That is mission, since we know already that that's the highest way or most impactful way to lead people. And obviously you need a team, because if you don't have a team, then what are you leading exactly? Nothing, right? And last but not least, your leadership ability, which is just one way to say your skill set and toolbox. So let's get deeper with mission, or starting with the end in mind. You can think of everything you do, be it an engineer, an individual contributor, or a leader of some sort, with or without a formal title, as an onion. Your problem-solving abilities, how you approach problem-solving is the how, but why you're solving the problem to begin with, that's the mission of what you're out to seek. And what is just like a side effect of your building a product. As Simon Sinek says, the greatest way to inspire action in your team, in your company, organization, or volunteering group is to start with why. And as we're going to see in a bit, starting with why acts both as a filter, as an enabler. People who don't believe in why you're solving the problem that you're solving, people who don't believe why you're training neural networks to actually spot sarcasm in user reviews or harassment in user reviews, they're not going to be on your team. So that's a filter. And at the same time, it will help you grow your team in a very meaningful way. People who want to be on your team want to be part of solving the problem. And you can think of like why tackling how first is really not that impactful if the way you're recruiting people for your cause or your team, or the way you go about leading people is, hey, come join us. We have the latest Django release, or we do React.js over jQuery or whatever, is that cutting edge that you have right now about trendy technologies, about how you're solving a problem, is very easy to adopt by another team, which will actually get people from your team to join theirs. So that's not really a competitive advantage. One way to think about a mission is to answer a question or thought experiments. Let's say your company tomorrow is going to outsource whatever you do, or functionalities or features of your project, to another team or another company. Why would they not do that? What is the mission critical value that your team is providing that your company can do without? Let's take an example. Whom of you knows Netflix? Raise your hands. All right, those who raise their hands, whom of you likes Netflix? Almost the same group, almost. And I've taken this from the Netflix careers website. I'm going to read it out loud. The product design team mission is to design a television experience that drives our members to discover and connect to stories, characters, and words they love. Now, I'm not sure if you actually enjoy Netflix or not, but I do. And I think if this is the mission of the product design team, they're kicking major ass. Like, they're doing really well at that. But why should you care? Why is leading by mission so important? Well, simply because when you lead by mission, it gives you superpowers. It gives your team a sense of purpose, a sense of ownership, that they are owning an entire problem space and why they're doing what they're doing. There's a sense of continuity in that. It also helps your team focus on the right problems. If your mission is to build a streaming TV service like Netflix, you're not gonna efficiently solve every single problem that you're gonna come across. That's wasteful. That's a waste of money and time. But instead, you'll focus on the mostly impactful problems, asking the question, what do I really need right now? to get closer to my mission, right? Like if you have an MVP, you might focus on user experience because that's the most important problem for you to increase user adoption, and you would actually disregard or deprioritize scalability. Later on, that might be the problem, and you will prioritize scalability over user experience. But how do we make progress on a mission? That's like very abstract and general. Or phrased differently, how do we measure progress on a mission? And as obvious as it sounds, we should measure what matters, but what does that mean? John Doerr, who's the guy that introduced a formula to Google called OKRs, Objectives and Key Results. After he introduced it to Google, that became the de facto standard of how Google sets goals and achieves them, or actually forgets about achieving goals if they're not proven to be impactful. And the way you go about it is that objectives are pretty much your intention or goal. Hey, I want to increase test coverage for my product by 90%. Or I want to continuously ship features to production daily. And key results are basically evidence that you describe. Like, how do I know that I achieved the goal? What would success look like? If your key result doesn't have a number, it's not a key result. You might be describing like an activity or a need or a meeting. That might be still important, but it's not a key result. One metaphor to think of is if your team's goal is to go on top of a hill, key results are basically signposts that tell you, yeah, go right here, you're on the right track there, and so on. Let's take an example. Let's say we want to successfully implement the weekly newsletter. Some of the key results that you might have is to grow subscriber base rate by 15% for Q1, increase click-through rate percentage to above industry average, or increase net promoter score by 20%. And as you can imagine, you can visualize each and every one of these key results on a report. You can obviously implement an automated KPI or metric using whichever tool that you have to actually visualize your progress. And you can check it every week to see if you're on the right track or not, if you're stuck or not. And the cool thing about breaking a mission down to OKRs is that it also gives you some superpowers that are in line with what the mission superpowers are. It allows your team for better teamwork because right now everybody's focused on getting that OKR done. To begin with, OKRs are pretty much defined in a brainstorming session. It's not like a top-down approach where higher management says, this is what we're going to do. It's the other way around. That's when the team comes up with a goal, brainstorms on it, believes it's the most important thing to do, and goes for a month or a quarter to achieve that, which really helps focusing on priorities. And as you track it, it instills a sense of accountability in your team. And here I have a short story to share. Last year, teams that trust you were tasked by coming up with goals for the year. Trust you did not tell us what our goals are, but we pretty much know what the missions are for teams. And obviously, just like with anything you do for the first time, you don't get it right, you get it somehow right. And what we ended up doing is some of the mistakes that we did is we started late, we started in Q2, that was one anti-pattern. And we came up with huge, enormous OKRs for the rest of the year. We came up with 6. We made some, we achieved some, and we actually fell short on some other OKRs. But interestingly enough, the OKRs that we actually achieved, like increasing test coverage for all of our components, or the ones that are more related to the business, had the clearest key results. All of them had KPIs that we can visualize using tools like Grafana or whatever, and actually measure weekly as we progress through them. Cool. So having talked about influence and leadership and mission and what's important with that, how do you break it down into goals? Let's talk about the next thing, which is team or leading people. In 2016, Google released an article on New York Times titled "What Google Learned from Its Quest to Build the Perfect Team," where they shared an experiment they did internally, which was very interesting to see. The experiment used Project Aristotle. Do you guys know Project Aristotle? No? 1, 2, okay. Uh, what Google did basically is they sent a survey to 180 teams all around the world. Some of them are co-located, some of them are completely remote or distributed, to collect data points to see what makes the best teams the best. And the most important thing that they learned is that teams that are top performing or well performing have 5 things in common. The most important one is what they call psychological safety. And you can think of psychological safety as a concept that describes the teamwork climate as characterized by relationships based on trust and mutual respect, where team members can actually feel they can be themselves. But what does that even mean on a more concrete level? So psychological safety is predicated on trust, but how do you even build that? How do you foster that? And as I try to, because when you know like something makes teams the best, you want that for your team, right? Like hopefully you would want that for your team. And in my search and conversations about how do you even build that, what would be a process to tackle that, or an algorithm of some sort, we discovered the 5 dysfunctions of a team, which is a model that describes teamwork, how teamwork can be built, and how teamwork can actually crumble. You can think of teamwork as you cannot build it except on a foundation of trust. And if your team lacks trust, then you can't really build teamwork, and that enables the team to go through several other problems. Trust here has a very simple definition. It's the willingness of team members to look vulnerable, to share, be open about their weaknesses. Hey, I don't know this thing called Docker and how it runs on Kubernetes. Can you please help me understand that? Or I don't know how asynchronous web APIs work in Python and coroutines and all that. Can we sit today and talk more about it, and you can help me do that? It's very simple. But when your team actually lacks that platform, your team member become afraid of engaging in healthy conflicts. And healthy conflicts are about debating ideas, the best solution to solve a problem in the shortest period of time. Simply because they don't trust each other, simply because you can think of it as the classical example where a junior team member joins a team of seniors, and these guys are super experienced, they haven't mentored someone in a while, and the junior member doesn't know how to work with more senior people, so pretty much someone dies. We don't know who, but someone kills the other. It's like, stop asking stupid questions. Or the junior would go like, can you please add more details here and there, which can be frustrating for the senior guy. So if ideas get shut down constantly like that, that affects team trust. And when team members don't have a platform to actually engage in healthy debates about ideas, around ideas, they're not going to commit to priorities or plans of action. So your team lacks commitment. And where a team lacks commitment, you don't have buy-in, you can't move forward, and team members cannot hold each other accountable. You can imagine how you would discover that later on during the sprint, someone is prototyping something that is unrelated to the sprint, or they decided to refactor something that you did not agree on, or suddenly they're engaging in other teams' problems. And when your team members do not hold each other accountable and do not hold you as a team lead accountable, that's when they start focusing on or valuing their own personal interests over the interests of the group or the team. Like, what is your short-term goal? If you do Scrum, that would be the sprint. If you do Kanban, that might be your Kanban cycle, or might be the OKR that you have for the quarter or the mission. And inattention to results is basically the end of your team as you know it. But rest assured, it's not as complicated as it sounds. And this has helped us, Entrust You, build really better teams, or at least begin the process of making them better steadily. And what we can do is we can start discussing some countermeasures for these. So the way you can build trust as a team lead, I really like the saying lead by example, but it was always something vague that I couldn't understand, like what does an example mean? We can translate it to a team dysfunction like this. You can go first and demonstrate vulnerability yourself. Like, none of us is a finished product, and there is always something to improve. There's always something new to learn. So you might as well ask team members, open up about your weaknesses, and ask the people that you work with day in and day out, what can you improve? Another way to actually establish trust is to reward collaboration and mentorship. I know a lot of people hate peer programming or mob programming, but we can think of it as a device that we can use to build trust more. Now, when people peer program together, they can open up more about their own ideas, and they can challenge it as they go about developing a feature or a functionality. Once you have some sort of trust in your team, we can start discussing fear of conflict. You need to acknowledge to your team as soon as possible that conflict is not only necessary, but it's always productive. But not any kind of conflict. We don't want it to get personal or emotional. And the healthy kind is when people engage in debates about ideas around software design, architecture, technology adoption, the best way to write this module or that module, or a design pattern. And the way you can turn conflicts into a healthy kind, or actually just shut them down if they're not healthy at all, is frame them under problem solving. Keep asking the question, how does this help us get closer to the OKR that we designed, right? Like, how does this help us increase our key result by a percentage that we get closer to the achievement of a goal, which will bring us closer to the achievement of a mission? And once you align people around problem solving, it gives discussing ideas more meaning. It grounds it more into reality rather than just being an academic discussing ideas all the time. And lack of commitment is kind of tricky. Once people have a platform to vent off or vent out their conflicts, they still can lack commitment because people in general need 100% clarity, which is really hard to get. Be it a team lead or be it an engineering manager, you always lack clarity. You're always operating from a state of partial information. And what you can do to actually get people to commit more is always incentivize making a decision as a better way to no decision. This obviously has its own cons, but it's much more impactful if you actually time box making decisions. Sorry. Let's say you're a team of engineers and you have no clue about software architectures beside building monoliths that are bigger than this entire building. So let's say you want to break it down into microservices, and you've been to a conference, you heard about a microservice architecture, and you would like to try that out. But no one on the team knows how to do that. So what you can do is you can time box making a decision. It's like, look, I need a volunteer to actually tackle this problem, and you have 1 week to come back with a drafted proposal, just a draft, not a complete solution, and we can discuss it from there. Because if you don't commit people to decisions, things can take forever. And once people commit to priorities and plans of action, you can start encourage them to hold each other accountable. Leading by example would be to encourage your team members to hold you accountable as a team lead when you're not doing things for the benefit of the goals or the mission. And lastly, within attention to results, what you can do to combat people primarily prioritizing their own personal benefits over the benefit of the group is to publicly announce declared wins. Just like with the example that we said with OKRs, where the entire team brainstorms on the team goals, you can publicly declare that way before you actually go about achieving that goal. And this ties everyone together. It creates some sort of a tension, but a productive one, where people are afraid, like, are we going to make it? Are we not going to make it? And that sort of creative tension keeps people focused on priorities. So hopefully, with like these very simple to follow exercises that are primarily expressed by you, leading by example, we can turn dysfunctional teams into functional teams, where they have an established platform of trust, engage in healthy debates around ideas, commit to priorities and plans of action, hold each other accountable, and focus on the group results. So what we can actually summarize with is that leading by example dictates you taking full ownership over everything. There are no bad teams, only bad leaders, which necessitates being adaptable to situations, right? Like every team is different, every situation is different, everyone on your team is different, and every stage as you go through building a team or scaling it would be different. So having talked about what a team is, let's discuss leadership ability a bit. So what I mean by leadership ability is your specific character, your specific strengths and weaknesses, which can be trained like any other skill, but unfortunately it takes time. But out of all the skills that can fit in there, which can make a TikTok sound like a self-improvement sort of TikTok, which I want to avoid, I'd like just to talk about leadership style. And there is one model of leadership that is really cool called the situational model of leadership, which says that your best way to lead someone or a team is not a single way all the time. It basically depends on a lot of factors in your environment. It depends on the commitment or motivation of the team member you're talking to and their level of experience or know-how. And we can think about it like a graph. This is taken from the official situational leadership website, by the way. We can imagine task behavior as how detailed are you going to get with that person regarding details, like how directive or micro would your style be. And supportive behavior is how much support that person needs to increase their commitment or motivation about a task. We can start talking about classical examples like a junior team member who is like begins with a yellow box that says telling. Their motivation is really high, so they require less supportive behavior from you. But they require a lot of details regarding how to do a task. Like we need to agree on the steps, we need to agree on the outcome, what's the format like, what are the acceptance tests. And as that team member matures or their motivation might drop, that's when you actually start selling them tasks. Now they're not only motivated or committed to every single task they can lay their hands on, now they're thinking of how can I grow more in a specific direction, and that's when you start sort of like selling them a task. So it's less of a directive approach and more of a convincing approach. And as your team member grows in terms of experience and know-how, they require less supportive behavior from you because their willingness and commitment is high. That's when you delegate the entire task to them. And delegation here means, here's the problem that we would like to solve. We don't know how to solve it, and we don't want to discuss how to solve it. Go think about it, design that software, give me a design document and a drafted proposal of how the team should go about solving this problem. Cool, so now we get to the cool stuff. When I first became a tech lead, I think I watched a TikTok by Pat Koa, and he talked about anti-patterns that new tech leads actually make. And I've made plenty of these myself. And hopefully we're going to talk about them now and relate them to the 5 levels of leadership, mission, and the 5 dysfunctions, and see why these anti-patterns are anti-patterns, pretty much like anti-patterns of software. So the first one, the dictator, which is like the team lead that makes the decisions all the time. Every single decision goes through them. Nobody decides on architecture or design patterns. Nobody decides on introducing a factory except them. And you can see how that is not really impactful. Like what kind of level of leadership is that? From 1, leading by position, all the way to 5, leading by mission. That would be 1, right? People follow them because they have to. What dysfunction does it introduce? It introduces absence of trust, right? Like if I'm making all the decisions all the time, it by definition means I don't trust you making the other decisions. Another dysfunction, this is my favorite, is the hero. And it's like a less badly intentioned anti-pattern than the dictator. And the hero is like the guy or the person that when production goes down, goes and fixes production. Now production is up. Nobody knew why production went down. Nobody knew why production is up. Nobody knew what happened or how it happened or why it happened, right? So even though like they're expressing like some sort of a Batman style of leadership, it doesn't grow people. Like they can arrive at results. It's like a level 3 leadership, but it's not level 4. People under them are not growing. They don't know how to solve the problem. If they go on vacation, they actually don't go on vacation. They take their laptop with them with production access. Another one is the mole. And I don't mean the snitch, I mean the animal, the mole. Spends most of his time underground. And that's when another example would be the newly promoted tech lead that is taking on too much work. They're biting more than they can chew, and they lose. Like they're spending so much time in the trenches, in the details. They're seeing the forest for the trees that nobody on the team has any high-level clarity anymore. Nobody on the team knows what the product team is planning to do in the next sprint or the next one or next year. And you're a team lead, you need to acknowledge that as soon as possible. You're a team lead because there are a set of responsibilities that someone on your team needs to fulfill. One of them is to see the forest for the tree, not the tree for the forest. You need high-level observability, and you need to provide that to your team. If you're all the time digging tunnels like a mole, then you lose that, and your team loses that as well. Last but not least, the tourist. This is, I think this is worse than the dictator. This is like when someone is not making all the decisions all the time, is when they're making the cool decisions all the time, and the dirty stuff gets offloaded to the team. And you can think of it like pretty much like any other tourist. You don't want to go to a no-go zone in any country that you go to. You want to go see cool stuff. You want to go see fancy stuff, eat at the best places, go take some tours. And this is what the tourist in a team does. They hang out in the cool React.js component. Nobody touches the jQuery stuff. They hang out in the Python 3 async web framework IO HTTP, and nobody has to touch that blocking IO on SQL Alchemy because nobody knows how to do it. So what kind of leadership is that? What kind of level? It's not growing people, right? Because if you're not taking full ownership of everything, how are you going to grow your team to actually overcome the ugly parts of the code? How are you going to be more experienced? Are you really owning the mission, or are you owning the cool parts of it? And lastly, the academic. That's like the classical case of the experienced tech lead who starts, after some point, starts managing up, and they lose track of the real world and the trenches, like the day-to-day activities. It's like an ivory tower sort of attitude. No, let's discuss this architectural design just for the sake of discussing architectural design. Yeah, I agree with you. That's the best decision. And your team is like fighting Unicode problems as they port their Python code from 2 to 3. And you're like, no, that's, that design pattern, best one. And that pretty much concludes my section on leadership ability and skills. So to sum up, we've talked about how leadership is all about influence, how your role as a leader, a team leader of any level, is about multiplying the impact of your team, how leading by mission is the best approach that you can have to increase that impact, how teamwork can only be built on a foundation of trust, and what are the mistakes that you can make, hopefully you won't, and avoid as a team lead. Thanks a lot for listening to me. Thanks a lot for being here. And one small note, we'll have like a short window to ask questions. But really, if you want to talk about this more in detail, if you want to learn more about our experiences at Trust You, or you want to share your own experiences, the challenges that you have actually faced, feel free to come up and come up to us at the Trust You booth. I'm really passionate about building teams. I've been on the receiving end of really less impactful, let's say, team leads and more impactful team leads, and I'm really excited I'm here and to talk to you guys more about this.
Hi, great presentation. I would like to ask you, what's the best and worst advice you've got as a team lead in your career?
Best and worst advice. I think the best advice I got is that things will only improve in your team to the extent that you care about them. The worst advice in your team is to not be transparent. It's like, have this attitude where you're like the boss or the manager, so that, because I don't know why, but people think that the only way to get respected is to create some sort of a barrier, which might have worked in the past for some type of team leads or managers, but I think that introduces a dysfunction by definition. Any more questions?
Other questions? Okay, I have one for you.
Yeah.
You give a lot of suggestions. Do they change in terms of the dimension of the team? So if you have a team of 3 people or 10 people, does they change?
I think, first of all, I've only been doing this for 4 years, so asking me in 4 years and I would have known more. But I think that the framework stays the same, right? So your approach to build teamwork based on trust and troubleshoot dysfunctions would be the same. Now, they come in different variations and flavors. If you have a co-located team, that might manifest itself in different ways. If you have a distributed team, that might be harder, right? So you might actually focus more on communication with a more remote team than a co-located team because they're there in space-time, physically there. So I think how you would go about troubleshooting a dysfunction is different, right? And this is like the situational model, but the framework says the same.
Hi.
Hi.
There are companies where openness and creating great relationship between teammates is regarded as a dysfunction because they are very hierarchical, very statistics and task and diagrams on the problem issue tracking software driven.
Yeah.
So this is some kind of company that kills these ideas. How do you handle, how do you thrive these ideas in such an environment?
Very interesting question. So before I joined Trustio, I worked at an oil and gas corporation as a software engineer, and the headquarters had 3,000 people. So I really can relate to what you're saying. Unfortunately, if you're an individual contributor, there isn't much to do. You can start talking to people, demonstrate how you can talk to them from an economical perspective. Like look, we lost people because of 1, 2, 3, and this is how this fits into a framework like the 5 dysfunctions of a team. If they are very structured and very statistical oriented, maybe you can find articles like the one that the Google did, which has statistics using the Project Aristotle, use case studies, try to recruit people to actually make other case studies about your team. That's going to be nearly impossible. But I don't know about the specific case that you have. If that's the way that higher management is functioning, you have to enter that closed circle by, I don't know, like survive for 10 years, get promoted to higher management, and then start convincing people around you. There is a limitation to everything. Did I answer your question?
Hi. About sharing anti-patterns, I think the most well-meaning and destructive anti-pattern I've observed in a long career, both as IC lead and manager, is managing by effort. You got 2 performers. One is doing like 70 hours a week. He's working all nights, all weekends, and barely manages. The other one, effortlessly, no problem, does 3 times as much. It's so easy to think the first one is meritorious and you should devote more to them, and the second one is a wastrel. But it's not that way. Simply some people are incredibly gifted and lucky, and you should count yourself incredibly lucky to have them on your team and try to see if they can infect others, but results are what matter. So I liked your emphasis, not effort.
Yeah,
There is no, and should be, no prize for effort. If effort doesn't bring results, something is wrong.
Exactly, yeah. Which piggybacks on the levels of leadership, right? Like arriving at results is like halfway through. It's getting at results, and I believe that, like, I think the word culture is like overused right now in tech. But the way I would think about it is that it's very important what behaviors you actually reward in your company, not just what behaviors you're also punishing, some sort of punishment. And if you're always incentivizing people who are working overtime all the time, then that's the dynamic that you introduce. That's the dysfunction that you introduced.
Okay, thank you everyone. If you have other questions, please reach out, Ahmad.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much.